The Society for Culture and Environment extends a warm welcome. You are watching a session on Adi Shankaracharya, Hinduism's greatest thinker, from the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival, January 2019. We have with us Mr. Pavan K Varma. Mr. Varma is a former Indian Foreign Service officer and a former member of Rajya Sabha. He will be in conversation with Mr. Raghav Chandra. Mr. Chandra is the president for the Society for Culture and Environment and the director of the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival. He is an IAS officer of the 1982 batch and writes on environment, economic, and public administration issues.
So I think that deserves a very big hand uh, because it's not easy to be a brand ambassador for a religion, especially when there are so many people who want to take on that role so easily, sometimes without merit as well. But you have raised it to an intellectual level, and that is what is so amazing and great about it. Adi Shankaracharya sir, you've written extensively and you have researched this subject so painstakingly. Must have been an absolutely, a prodigy, a child prodigy who set out at a young age from Kaladi, where he was born in Kerala in the 8th century AD. A great thinker right from childhood who had great wisdom. He traveled across India and set up the four mutts, which you have described in detail. But sir, what is amazing is that in your book, you have not just traced his spiritual journey, you have also traced his philosophy. The ideas that made his work, his contribution to India so great, which stretches across religions, stretches across boundaries, breaks cultural barriers, and that is what is so amazing. So first of all, my first question to you is, how did you think of a subject as esoteric, a subject as detailed as Adi Shankaracharya, on which there has been practically no work written in the English language? Sir.
Well, thank you, Raghav. This book has been a labor of love and of discovery. Why did I write it? Hinduism is a way of life. It has no one text, no one only God, no one only church, no one only prescribed ritual, no one only mandatory congregation. And so it is a way of life, and in many ways that is its strength. Because that which cannot be straight-jacketed on the basis of anything prescriptive is by its definition Anant and Anadi, beyond the beginning and eternal. But sometimes I feel that perhaps that is also for those who are practicing Hindus, like many of you here, its weakness. Because it's a way of life, even those who are Hindus are increasingly adrift from the spiritual content and core and critical mass of the religion itself. We are Hindus, we remain Hindus, we celebrate a few festivals and rituals, very often unaware of the symbolic meanings of those festivals themselves. But somewhere we are dealing with the shell, leaving the treasure out of our hands. if we don't become familiar once again with the sheer profundity of thought, the sheer leap of imagination, the sheer loftiness of conception, the sheer cerebral compressed energy that is the core of Hinduism. And today we have a situation where very often we are confronted with people who claim that they alone know what Hinduism is. How do you confront them? How do you counter them? If you wish to. Unless you can go back to your own religion without xenophobia, without chauvinism, but with a student's search for learning. And that is what made me write and discover this great genius. But that's the only way to describe him. And in a sense, a legacy and a symbol of the continued intellectual journey of Hinduism. Imagine in your mind, 5,000 years ago, in a forest near a small town, a group of people, seers, sages, saints, thinkers, who voluntarily leave conventional life to contemplate on what could be or what is not God. The search is not for God. The search is for what could be the great underlying truth behind the bewildering plurality of the cosmos and our own tiny and puny lives within it. That's the search. And from there come the Upanishads, a dialogue, not prescriptive fiat, not diktat, a dialogue, a search, a discovery for what could be that truth. Very rarely is God mentioned. And in that discovery, the Upanishads become perhaps one of the most remarkable corpus of documents. I mention that because Adi Shankaracharya takes the elliptical. The Upanishads are not an organized body of thought. They are conversations. Nobody knows who wrote them. Nobody knows how many there are. There are 13 principal Upanishads, but there could be many more. They are dialogues. And in those dialogues, there are the great elliptical insights. Aham Brahmasmi. Tat Tvam Asi. I am At Brahm. Pragyanam Brahm. These are insights, seen in moments of deep and absolute contemplation. And on that, elliptical insights came about certainly the Advaita school of thought, which Shankaracharya developed into a rigorous philosophical structure of thought. But also the other 6 systems of Hindu philosophy. The Sankhya, the Yoga, the Nyaya, the Vaisheshik, the Purv-Mimamsa, the Uttar-Mimamsa. And what will surprise you is that 5 of these 6 systems at least are technically atheist. They don't talk of God. They are trying to discover what, as I said, could be the truth underlying this vast cosmos. And so, Adi Shankaracharya was the man. If Jaimini, Gautam, Kannad, Patanjali developed the other schools, Shankaracharya developed the Advaita school, the non-dualistic Advaita school about Brahma.
I just intervene at this stage and ask you, sir, before we get into the philosophy of Shankaracharya, which you described as one of the greatest of all time, do you think Shankaracharya was also reacting to the vast spread of Buddhism and Jainism in India and was reviving? He's often referred to as a great Hindu revivalist and reformer, whether it was a kind of reactive attitude and approach towards the vast and firm ground which these other sects and religions had established in India, and therefore is not just a philosopher but really a strategist for Hinduism. So what's your take on that?
I don't think so. The hagiographies, जो कसीदे लिखे जाते हैं ना, जो कुछ डिसाइपल्स ने आदि शंकराचार्य के बाद उन पर लिखे, they are excessive. They describe him as the avatar of Shiva. वो आपकी मान्यता है, आप मानिए ना मानिए. But sent to earth from heaven in order to defeat Buddhism and to once again revive Hinduism. Are Baba, Adi Shankaracharya was called by his critics a crypto-Buddhist himself. And actually, if you visualize for a moment the notion of Brahman and the whole notion of Mayavad, where what you see is not what is. जो अस्थाई है, जो अस्थिर है, जो परिवर्तनशील, that which is impermanent, that which is unstable, that which is subject to change, cannot be the truth. Mayavad itself is so closely linked to the notion of Shunya, of Buddhism. When Adi Shankaracharya went from Kaladi at the age of 6 or 7 or 8, a child prodigy, and walked from there to Omkareshwar on the Narmada here. I don't know how many of you must have been to Omkareshwar, of course. It's a beautiful town on the Narmada. And that is when he met his guru. He chose to go there, the hermitage of Govindapad. Now Govindapad's father, the sage Gaudapad, is considered to be a neo-Buddhist or a crypto-Buddhist himself. The Karikas that he wrote are actually very close to Buddhism. So there is a critique of Buddhism. In Hinduism itself, of which Shankaracharya was a part. और मुझसे अगर आप पूछे तो मैं आपको बहुत संक्षिप्त में बट सिंपलिस्टिकली बता सकता हूँ कि हिंदुइज्म और बुद्धिज्म आर वेरी सिमिलर. देयर इज अ ग्रेट डिग्री ऑफ ओवरलैप. फर्क क्या है? बुद्धिज्म का बीज वर्ड है दुख, sorrow and the way out of sorrow. Everything else flows from it. और हिंदुइज्म का बीज वर्ड है आनंद, joy. यही फर्क. From this stems a structure of thought which has many overlaps. So I don't believe the notion of Brahm itself. What is Brahm? As Shankaracharya derived from the insights of the Upanishad, Brahm is a drisht, unseen, achint, adrisht, akhand. Brahm is nirvishesh chinmatram, undifferentiated consciousness. Brahm is sarva pratyaya darshani, all knowing. Brahm is universal, ekam ek sarva vyapi. Brahm is amad, measureless beyond measure. Brahm is anant anad. And Brahm is pur, fullness itself. And the only inferential experience of Brahm Anubhav जो कि आपको इस जिंदगी में हो सकता है, वो है सच्चिद आनंद। चिदानंद रूप शिवोहम शिवो। He denies everything. It requires tremendous cerebral audacity to assert and deny. न मैं राग द्वेष, न मैं मोह लोभ, मदो नैव मैं नैव मात्सर्य भाव, न धर्मो न चर्थो न कामो न मोक्ष। चिदानंद रूप शिवो हम शिवो। न पुण्यम न पापम न सौख्यम न दुखम न मंत्रो न तीर्थम न वेदो, वेद भी नहीं है, न यज्ञ। अहम भोज्यनम नैव भोज्यम न भोक्ता। क्या बचा? चिदानंद रूप शिवो हम शिवो हम शिवो हम शिवो।
So you talked about the Omkareshwar on the banks of the Narmada used to be collector Khandwa, and I had the privilege of hosting the Shankaracharya over at that time to rebuild and restore that temple which was falling apart. It's a small digression for this thing for your knowledge. And at that time we were told the story that Guru Govind Pad was in a heavily into meditation and in a stage of trance jab Shankaracharya wahan pahunche, and the Narmada was in spate. So he collected the waters of the Narmada in his Kumandalu and the waters receded. That is the story which, however apocryphal, it resounds through that temple city. And having said that, sir, the Shankaracharya, they themselves who have emerged from the mutts that Adi Shankaracharya set up, they themselves have not really thought and worked in unison. They've always had conflicting viewpoints. And
conflict to Raghav is a good thing in Hinduism.
okay.
Where have they agreed? Why should you agree?
Okay, that's a point of view, sir, absolutely. So now I'll come to the philosophy part, sir. The roots of Advaitism, Aham Brahmasmi, are grounded that there is no divisibility, that one is united with the Supreme and all that. Have you, in the course of your travels, in your other role as a politician, and not as a writer and not as a researcher on this work of Adi Shankaracharya, found that in India we have not as a race and as a civilization been able to conform to the tenets which Adi Shankaracharya so beautifully propounded, that there is no difference between human beings and that there should not be, and yet we have caste dividing our society. We still are, so finicky about color and so on. There intercaste marriages between the Brahmins and between a Dalit are still taboo to a great extent. Where have we gone wrong in accepting the teachings of Adi Shankaracharya, and where exactly do you think is the gap, despite the fact that Shankaracharya laid it out very openly that there should not be any dualism?
You see, Shankaracharya, I don't believe, was a social reformer. Social reform could be a consequence of what he said. His primary concern was the search for what he believed could be the truth. And that search was all absorbing. He was a philosopher. But certainly, जबकि तुझबिन नहीं कोई मौजूद, तो ये हंगामा है खुदा क्या है, as गालिब से। तो जब ब्रह्मी सब कुछ है, तो ये कास्ट सेगमेंटेशंस क्या चीज है? जब आप में भी ब्रह्म में, मुझ में भी है, जड़ में भी है, चेतन में भी है, और ब्रह्म एकम एक सर्वव्यापी है, it is beyond, अखंड है. And when I come to a little correlation with science, I'll explain it to you. Then where is the question of man-made distinctions? And there is a famous story of him meeting a Chandal all of you are familiar with it, in the Tang gullies of Sankirtan gullies of Kashi, where he says, when he meets, and people are getting the Chandal out of his way, and he says, Chandala tusta, tu dvijostu. Whether you're a Chandal or a twice born, Gurureshya Manisha Mama. You are my Guru. That is not what I think, not what I should be, not what I believe. That is my resolve. He composed the Manisha Panchakam stotra of just 5 stanzas. On the spot, it is said. And it's part of the anthology which is appended to my text in the book. So obviously, the notion of Brahma did not allow man-made distinction. But whether his main aim was to eradicate caste, I must tell you, in Chennai I was launching this book and I was in discussion with Gopal Gandhi. And Gopal Gandhi was asking me also similar questions, like you are, about whether Shankaracharya, if he was such a great mind, succeeded. And my final answer to Gopal Gandhi was कि गोपाल जी ये बताइए कि आपके ग्रैंडफादर महात्मा गांधी से बड़ा अपोस्टल ऑफ नॉन वायलेंस तो कोई हुआ नहीं इन रीसेंट हिस्ट्री. तो क्या उनके जाने के बाद समाज से हिंसा चली गई है? नहीं ना गई, पर उनकी सोच तो अब भी वैध है, वैलिड है. जो विजन उनका था, it is still somewhere a guide if we take the trouble to know it. आप शंकराचार्य पढ़िए and see his reaction to caste, then you as a Hindu are better equipped to deal with those who force caste down your throat.
Absolutely, sir. So,
अगर आप पढ़ेंगे नहीं तो फिर तो कुछ नहीं हो सकता. वैसे किताब अवेलेबल है.
on his ability to kind of debate, it is said that Shankaracharya was one of the best debaters this country has ever produced. And there is, us zamane mein they used to have Shastrat. So his famous Shastrat with Mandan Mitra, Mitra's wife Saraswani, Mishra ki Patni Saraswani, in which it is said that finally it boiled down to asking a question about Kam Shastra, which Shankaracharya, being celibate, was not in a position to answer, and then he embedded himself in the,
embedded. Embedded, you mean the pun?
So I'd like you to describe this to the audience.
I can't describe what he did, but nevertheless, a lot of these stories are meant to be, if not apocryphal, they're meant to be symbolic. There's a message. And what is important is the civility of the debate. Adi Shankaracharya was the proponent of the Gyan Marg. Mandan Mishra, a great scholar himself, was the most outstanding thinker of the Purv Mimamsa school, Advait Uttar Mimamsa. Karmakand Purv Mimamsa. The Purv Mimamsa school believed that if you practice karma in accordance with as prescribed by the Vedas, that in itself is a way to salvation. And that was the point of difference. But in order to settle it, they didn't pull out a gun and shoot the others. They agreed to what was a great tradition in Indian civilization. And we have, I think Neeta Khanna is somewhere here, we have started a movement called Shastrat, the art of civilized dialogue, where I have the intellectual prowess to disagree, but also the pedigree, the breeding, the character, the courage, the strength to listen. And then you have a dialogue. And Mandan Mishra and Adi Shankaracharya agreed to have a dialogue to settle their differences and look at the civility of the terms of reference that Shankaracharya agreed to Mandan Mishra's wife being the judge. It's a matter of faith, a code of conduct, the lack of imputation of motive. That once you are given that job, you will do it impartially. And Adi Shankaracharya actually won the debate. Then Ubhay Bharati, Mandan Mishra's wife, a great scholar herself, said, "You won it with him, but you have still to debate with me because I am one half of him." And then she asked him questions on the Kam Shastra. And since Adi Shankaracharya was by choice a sannyasi, he was obviously out of his depth. So he asked for 30 days time. And the story goes that at that time, in a nearby kingdom, a young prince had died. And Shankaracharya, through his yogic powers, became incarnated in the body of the young prince who miraculously became alive. And Shankaracharya left his own body in a gufa, again on the banks of the Narmada. And that gufa is still pointed out by people today. यही गुफा थी जहाँ पे वो अपनी काया छोड़ गए. And then he goes back in the body of that prince to much celebration back to the palace. And there, with the wives of the young prince who had died, he learns about Kam Shastra. And in fact, and this is also typical of Hinduism, and I'll explain to you why. He begins to enjoy himself so much that he forgets what his real calling is. So that his disciples have to come and start to sing Nirgun Bhajan before him until he remembers. आप काम को एक जैसे रामायण में लिखा है कि जब कामदेव चलते थे तो एक कोई भी ऐसी चीज नहीं थी जो झुक न जाए. पेड़, पत्ती, पौधे, पंछी, आसमान. It's a powerful emotion. And so he comes back. But what is the purpose of this story? The purpose of this story is that there are 4 purusharths in Hinduism: Dharma, Arth, Kama, Moksha. Just as an aside, I'll tell you. In the Kama Sutra, in the first chapter, which is, the book is not only about impossible postures. It's a book that assesses a point of view. But Syan is asked, why do we need this book? By an imaginary interlocutor. उनसे कोई पूछता है कि ये किताब क्यों लिख रहे हैं? और Syan का जवाब है that ये जो 4 पुरुषार्थ हैं, धर्म, अर्थ, काम, मोक्ष, each of the first 3 pursued in proportion and none in exclusion, leads as part of a balanced life to the last, which is moksha or salvation. Which means that the pursuit of the sensual in proportion but not in exclusion also has philosophical sanction, and therefore it's not enough just to be a lover, you must be an accomplished lover, and therefore the Kama Sutra. Now what is the story about Shankaracharya and Kam Shastra and Ubhay Bharati? Shankaracharya was a sannyasi. His followers didn't have to be. He was not privileging one choice that he made as necessarily superior to other choices. So, in a sense, it broad-based his appeal to a much bigger laity. And that is the essential principle behind this story.
Na tato, na mata, na bandur, na naptvat, testam, kotestam, tumeka, bhavani. So Adi Shankaracharya was also one who brought in Devi worship, or the worship of the female spirit and Shakti, whereas traditional patriarchal Indian texts had always focused on the male god. So would you like to tell us?
कोई मठ देखिए शंकराचार्य ओमकारेश्वर से गए काशी. He went to Kashi, which was the Harvard of Asia, as far as philosophers go. On the banks of the Ganga, philosophers of all points of view. Even today, when I'm researching this book, I traveled from Kaladi to Kedarnath. Because at the age of 32, the young age of 32, Shankaracharya took Samadhi in Kedarnath. And in the course of these 32 years, Raghav, he set up the 4 mutts. He traveled by foot the length and breadth of India, from Kerala to Kedarnath. He wrote the most learned, erudite and extensive commentaries, the Bhashyas on the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Brahma Sutra, among others. And wrote the most lyrical hymns. I mean, sabne suna hai. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Mudamate. So, this was his achievement. But the चारों मठ उन्होंने establish किए, all of them are Shakti Peeths. और देवी की प्रतिमा है. And it is my conclusion in my book that in this he was greatly influenced by Kashmir Shaivism. In fact, I argue that he not only went to Srinagar, those of you who have been to Srinagar have seen the temple on the mount, the Shankaracharya temple. There is the gufa where he lived there. And he actually met with the greatest proponent of Kashmir Shaivism, who is a contemporary of Adi Shankaracharya, Vasugupta. Or Kashmir Shaivism and Advait as known by Shankaracharya initially, there is very little difference. Brahma is absolute. सिर्फ सवाल है नित्य अनित्य विवेक का. What is real, what is unreal?
Talking of real and unreal, now we must talk about your, what you brought out, the comparison between the dance of Shiva, the eternal Tandav, the dance of Natraj, the subatomic and the subatomic particles. And what Adi Shankaracharya has written in his book and in his theories of Advait, and you've drawn a parallel between them. So perhaps you could tell us where you think modern science is headed, and do you think there is a convergence which is coming about between Shankaracharya's philosophical underpinnings and between the achievements and what modern science is arriving at?
That is a fascinating chapter for me in my book. It's called The Remarkable Validation of Science. And this is not the Dinanath Batra school of Hinduism. Let me clarify. A lot of thought has gone into it because the notion of Brahma, as I just explained to you, that pulsating nirguna consciousness pervading the universe as that supreme reality and everything else being a derivative of it, that has received remarkable validation. The entire notion of Brahma. And I made a particular study of cosmology, quantum physics and neurology. Now, there's not enough time, but I'll sum it up. For instance, Brahma is Amar, immeasurable. Now, what do we know about, through cosmology, about our cosmos today? Light travels at the speed of roughly 300,000 kilometers a second. Our solar system is 150,000 light years across. But our solar system is part of a galaxy. Our nearest neighbor, the galaxy Andromeda, is 2.3 million light years away. Light years away. But now cosmology shows that there are 225 billion galaxies. Please, the mind boggles, so I want you to follow what I'm saying. at least 225 billion galaxies, of which at least half are twice the size of ours, each with at least 100 million stars, of which half are at least twice or more the size of the sun. This already mind-bogglingly large universe is, surprising enough, cosmology reveals today, expanding every second as I utter the next word at the speed of light. Expanding into what? Does it create space or is there space behind it? Who knows? It is expanding every second in the speed of light. It's like if you take a balloon and put 3 dots on it, Raghav, and blow into it, the dots begin to move away. That's how the universe is expanding. So it is, by all counts, infinite, infinite. It is eternal, anadi, anand. Cosmology reveals that the universe as we know it can be dated to be 13.7 billion years old. हम बात करते हैं ancient history of 5,000 years ago. 13.7 billion years old. But scientists are not happy with that. They want to know कि भाई शुरुआत कहाँ से हुई और अंत कब होगा. So the theory came about, and Stephen Hawking and others spoke about it, of the Big Bang. That at one moment of time there was this remarkable inflationary expansion called the Big Bang, when from an infinitesimal speck the universe exploded and came into being. True, possible. But then scientists began to say that if there could be this inflationary expansion at one moment of time, why cannot the film roll backwards and there could be a remarkable de-expansion where you come back again to the infinitesimal point, the great collapse. So it's cyclical. सृजन, स्थिति, प्रलय, जो हमारी theory है, कल्पों की, it's cyclical, it's eternal, anadi, anand, it's akhand. There are many, that chapter you will read, it's very readable, but the universe is indivisible. And one of the most simple experiments was carried out as far back as 1935. It's called the EPR experiment. Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen experiment. Some of you must be science students and aware of it. Where if you take 2 spinning electrons, the momentum of the spin is the same, but they will, if put on the same axis, spin clockwise or counterclockwise. Now this experiment was carried out where one is in, for instance, New Delhi, and the other spinning electron is taken to Seattle. The moment they are put on the same precise axis and you measure it, they acquire the clockwise and counterclockwise. Theoretically, it could be Mars or Delhi. This is transformation of information to the other electron faster than the speed of light. How does it happen? So that which is that Brahm is akhand. Then Brahm is pure consciousness. Now you have, from Max Planck to Edwin Schrödinger, a whole lot of Nobel laureates have said that consciousness is primary, matter is derivative. Edwin Schrödinger, who won the Nobel laureate for physics, as you know, in 1933, I think, says that a unitary consciousness pervades the universe. So it's not as if it's just matter. There is a consciousness behind it. I'm summarizing it very ruthlessly because we are short of time. But now let me complete this thought. So the world is real, hai bhi, sat hai bhi or nahi bhi hai. That is Mayavad. Na? When it's a mishran of both sat and asat. What is quantum physics showing? Quantum physics has revealed a nanoscopic world where nothing can be taken for granted. Nothing. Matter is energy, energy is matter. Both matter and energy could be a particle or a wave. 96% of the universe is dark matter about which we know nothing. So what we see, I see you because that is what my sensory faculties show me, but actually you are just empty space with waves of energy. So the world as you see it is not the world as it is, but the world as you see it. है भी और नहीं भी है, क्षणिक है, क्षण भंगु है, अभी है और नहीं है, और जो ट्रांजिएंट है वो सत्य नहीं हो सकता. When it says aham brahmasmi, that you are Brahma, what is neurology showing? Neurology is showing that although the brain is a material object, it has an inherent capacity for self-transcendence of consciousness. So experiments are being carried out in the labs abroad, including in Harvard. One of them, I'll just say, is about a trained and practiced meditation. And a small string is tied to his finger, and he's now in a nuclear science lab. And just as he's about to slip into the deepest moment of meditation, he gives a tug with his fingers, so the scientists are alerted, and they do a speck of his brain. And everything in the brain has changed. So the normal area of the brain, which is called the orientation association area, which is permanently active. Mind to kabhi sthir hota hi nahi. As Buddha said, it's like a monkey jumping from one branch to another all the time. 5 seconds agar aapka mind sthir ho jaye to meditation. So that becomes silent. The colors of the brain change to very cool blues and greens. And Dr. Andrew Newberg and other scientists who are working on them says that the only experience that the meditationer comes out of that meditational experience, and this is borne out by the scientific coordinates, is one of complete union with the entire cosmos and absolute bliss. Chidanand, awareness and bliss. So that which is you is that which is that. Tat tvam asi. Now, I'm summarizing it, but this is remarkable what science is showing. Now, what is even more remarkable is that what scientists are establishing empirically today through scientific experiment and discovery could be seen through the philosopher's eye 4,000 years ago in moments of the deepest insight and contemplation.
Wonderful. So, before we all go into a meditative trance ourselves, and Satchidanand bliss is what we are experiencing, I'd like to throw this open to the audience to ask a few quick questions. So there's a hand up already at the back. Please name yourself and keep yourself brief to a question rather than a statement. The gentleman at the back.
Myself, Sanjeev, what is your comment on
No,
that?
8 minutes, okay. We'll give you a chance. It's that gentleman there.
Should I speak out loud?
Mic ke bol dijiye, aage aake bol dijiye. Come,
Yeah.
you're a young man, you can run in front. बोलिए. वहीं से इतना आगे कीजिए.
My name is Anmol. My question to you is, you said that the Shankaracharya was setting up these 4 peaks. Was he also thinking of the geography of India and the contours of how the geography of India will look like in years to come when he was setting up these 4 peaks?
I have not the slightest doubt that we are a young nation but an ancient civilization. So when Winston Churchill said, with the conceit of a colonizer, that to say that India is the unity or India is a nation is to say that the equator is the country. He didn't realize that the civilizational notion of India has existed from time immemorial. And if 1200 years ago, The mutts are really a civilizational map of India. Shringeri in the south, Dwarka, Puri and Joshimath. It is a civilizational map of India, and that notion has existed for very long.
What are your comments on Yat Pinde Tak Brahmand?
अपना नाम बता दीजिए।
Sanjeev Gupta, what are your comments on Yat Pinde Tak Brahmand?
Yet Pinde.
Tak Brahmand.
What does that mean?
You have said a Tat Tat Masi in the same dialogue.
No. Tattvam Asi is that whatever is Brahman. Not only necessarily me. You are that because there is nothing but that. And why does the mistake happen? It is because of avidya. It's a dosha of perception which is called avidya. What does avidya do? It makes you blur the difference between the real and the impermanent. Nitya, anitya, vivek. So it's very interesting. We take that which is transient as permanent and that which is permanent as non-existent. अब ये तो हमारी दोष है. जिसको ब्रह्म अनुभव हुआ, he is not in doubt. And how does avidya operate? It operates through avaran and vikshep. What is avaran? Avaran is masking the truth. Vikshep is distorting the truth. So what is and why does this happen? The very scientific analysis. What is the mind? If you read Shankaracharya, the mind consists of three things: intellect, buddhi, sense of I-ness, ahankar, ego, and the third is chit, the sakshi. Now, normally the mind is so constantly full of activity, mostly sterile. So what does yoga say? Yoga chitta vriddhi nirodha. Yoga is the stilling of the mind. That is yoga. आप कोई भी आसन कर लें, शवासन में भी लेट जाए, your body won't rest until your mind rests. You have to break the chain of ceaseless thought and go into that void, which is the same void as Buddhism, which is Shunya. Except that in Shunya there is nihilism. All the Shankaracharya say कि जब शून्यत से जो रेफरेंशियल आपको एक्सपीरियंस है वो आनंद का है, वो चिदानंद का है. That's all. So what does the mind? How does the mind work? If you still the mind, and if through Shravan, Manan, Chintan, Vimarsh, Nididhyashan, which is meditation, if you can negate the ego. That is why Shankaracharya sanctioned everything. He said, Brahma है तो फिर पूजा की भी क्या जरूरत है? मैं तो हूँ ही. Then he broke knowledge into two parts, Paravidya, Aparavidya. Paravidya में तो nothing matters. You have reached that state of transcendence. Aparavidya के stage में, when you are in a preparatory stage, he sanctions everything. That's why he's called the Shanmat Sthapanacharya, the man who assimilated Hinduism. He says, Prapatti, Bhakti, Yoga, जो चाहे पूजा पाठ करो ना, anything. आप सुप्रीम मोमेंट ऑफ भक्ति में क्या होता है? जब आप भज गोविंदम कहते हो, मोड़ मते, you are negating your ego because you have left everything to some other agency. That's a preparatory step. It's good. Follow it. So once you cross that, then you are on that path, and that is not some heaven that could happen afterwards. That is something you can seize now with a bit of practice and meditation. And by the way, with all of that, it may not happen to you. Shankaracharya कोई आसान आदमी तो थे नहीं. It can happen to anyone, anytime. It's intuitive. If you talk to Jaggi Sadguru, it happened to him while he was going up a mountain on a motorcycle after having had a bad love affair. Swami Ramakrishna Paramahansa, it used to happen to him every now and then. Because what you need for Brahma Anubhav is not Pandityam, not intellectual virtuosity, but balyam, childlike simplicity, surrender. वो तो करिए.
So, let's give him a big hand. I don't think there can be a better exposition of the philosophy of Adi Shankaracharya than that, sir. Thank you very much. Delighted to be with you in this at this moment, and of course, delighted to have you in the Bhopal.
Thank you for watching the session from BLF 2019. Kindly subscribe to our channel for more such videos.